While some people might try to convince you otherwise, objectivity has no place in the discussion of art, no matter how beloved a piece of work might be by the masses. That said, dare to suggest that one of gaming's sacred cows might not be quite so perfect, and you're sure to be met with a ton of resistance from overzealous fans whose response will definitely be totally reasonable. This isn't to argue from a disingenuous position and suggest that every single thing about these games is terrible or even merely bad, but simply that there are extremely valid major critiques to be made about them. Nevertheless, these criticisms are sure to make a lot of people angry, and if you're a fan of any of the most popular video games of the last 25 years, you should probably brace yourself. Again, opinions are opinions, we've all got them, and are free to express them. Though if you subscribe to the belief that these games aren't quite all they're cracked up to be, you're gonna be fending off the die-hard fans left and right. Little bit of a personal caveat, this list was written by Jack Pooley. These are his takes, not mine. Some of them I agree with, some of them I don't. Let's get into it. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 video games you constantly have to defend hating. Number 10, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Final Fantasy VII Remake was released to sky-high expectations, the original being arguably one of the greatest video games of all time. And while many felt that Square Enix more than rose to the occasion, saying a bad word against it basically required you to testify in front of a grand jury as justification. Nostalgia is one hell of a drug, and Final Fantasy VII Remake categorically proves that. This isn't to say that it's not a technically compelling package, but it's also in many respects exactly the worst thing people expected from a contemporary mega-budget remake of a hallowed classic. For one, it's an aggressively bloated experience, packed with repetitive copy-paste dungeons, causing the main story to clock in at a solid 10 hours longer than it really needs to be. The side missions are often tedious, the graphics are a surprisingly mixed bag, those skyboxes, woof, and it overall smacks of a game desperately trying to justify the dubious necessity for at least 2 sequels. Call FF7 Remake a product of AAA game devs' increasing tendency towards bloat-filled gameplay, all in the quest for greater player engagement, and you'll catch a fleet of side eyes or worse from fans. Number 9, any FromSoftware game. There are few video game developers with a more enthusiastic fan base than FromSoftware, who've built an empire on their singular brand of brutally difficult action RPGs. Dare suggest to any fan of Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, or Elden Ring that you can't stand the games because you find them too difficult, and it's a near mathematical certainty that you'll soon enough hear the immortal words, "get good." Complaining aloud that any of these games are too challenging to be fun, that the repetition is more irritating than enjoyable, is a one-way ticket to mockery from fans within earshot. They'll tell you that the games really aren't that hard, that it's your fault you keep dying, and the reward of finally conquering a tough boss overpowers the frustration of getting there. Tell a FromSoft acolyte that you don't play games to be digitally chastised, and they'll quite likely sneer at you with derision, while you desperately try to convince them you're not a quote filthy casual. Unfortunately, expressing your disdain for a FromSoftware game will forever change how your gaming cred is perceived by a certain subset of gamers. Number 8, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty is often held up as one of the most ahead of its time games ever made, one of the earliest postmodern video games which passed comment on itself, the player, and also proved impressively prescient with regard to contemporary society. But complain about the fact that you got bait and switched by Hideo Kojima, and you'll be fighting an uphill battle to convince fans that you're not a dunderhead Philistine who lacked the mental wherewithal needed to pass the game's deep intellectual well. Though MGS2's gameplay gets a lot right, slyly switching out Solid Snake for Raiden after the game's prologue was a dirty trick that still leaves a sour taste in the mouths of many players. In many respects, it feels like the ultimate Hideo Kojima game, as infuriating as it is sometimes brilliant, unintentionally hilarious, and existing in spite of what the player might actually want from it. MGS2's esteem has really only grown with fans and critics over the last 2 decades, and so if you happen to still be bitter that Kojima lied about the game's protagonist, apparently this makes you petty and entitled. Ridiculous for someone to actually want to play the game the marketing sold them, right? Number 7, Uncharted 4 A Thief's End. This one's tricky for me because it was my game of the year that year, but let's do it. Naughty Dog are one of the most pervasively celebrated developers in the industry, and with the release of Uncharted 4 A Thief's End, critics said that they outdid themselves with their most ambitious and thrilling cinematic action-adventure game to date. Except Uncharted 4 is pretty much a textbook example of what happens when a developer with near unlimited resources doesn't know when to stop. A Thief's End end is an exercise in unchained excess, with Nathan Drake's seemingly breezy final outing distended into a stamina-annihilating slog. For many, the 15-hour playtime, a far cry from the 8 to 10 hours of the previous 3 games, was an unnecessary scaling up, which rendered the adventure more exhausting than entertaining. Though reducing the number of tiresome gunfights was definitely welcome, far too much of the playtime was taken up by repetitive platforming, lest we forget those dreaded crate pushing segments. While its mighty production values are never in doubt, Uncharted 4 is the only game in the series to outstay its welcome, and in turn feel like an actual chore at times. Hot take, spin-off title The Lost Legacy is a better game in basically every way. Well, at least that I can kind of agree to. Number 6, Goldeneye 007. Goldeneye 007 might well be the sacred cow to end all sacred cows. It's very intentionally the only old game we've included because it's simply too easy to rag on a game for being dated. But facts be facts, the N64's iconic, groundbreaking first-person shooter has aged like milk left in the scorching summer sun. This is admittedly true of many classic games from the N64 era. Super Mario 64 could have made the cut too, honestly. But going back to GoldenEye today, armed with all those precious childhood memories of playing it, makes for a harrowing, eye-opening experience. Look, the graphics are what they are, but what really dates the game beyond belief is the controls. The single-stick control scheme makes aiming and moving an absolute nightmare, especially with so many years of dual-stick controllers now behind us. Beyond that, character movement is unbearably sluggish, the enemy draw distance is appalling, and how many of us can truly say we enjoyed the campaign levels where we had to protect Natalia, a person with all the self-preservation instincts of a baked potato? We're generally told to respect classic games despite how poorly they might have aged, and while GoldenEye's impact on the genre can't ever be denied, it's a sheer chore to play in its original form today. Number 5, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Oh boy, I didn't even write this list and I'm scared to read this out, but here we go. Only slightly less hallowed a game than GoldenEye is a more modern Nintendo classic, and what many will argue to their deaths is the single greatest video game of the last decade, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. With its massive, wholly scalable open world that grants the player freedom to go defeat Ganon whenever they want, it's certainly an alluring title and one that evidently captured the hearts and minds of many. Yet so much of Breath of the Wild feels designed to frustrate. The weapon degradation, limited inventory, and difficulty of climbing in the rain first and foremost. Though fans love to parrot the claim that Nintendo designed the game this way to, quote, encourage experimentation, these restrictions are, more often than not, annoyances that generate busywork. Then there's the disappointing lack of conventional Zelda dungeons, with the many shrines dotted around the map serving as unfulfilling substitutes. You can't really blame Nintendo for wanting to shake up the series' formula somewhat, but the result inevitably wasn't going to please everyone. It certainly went down well with a lot of fans, but declare in a public space that Breath of the Wild actually isn't a very good Zelda game, and people will swarm you like you just slapped Tom Hanks. Boy, that one comes out different after the Oscars. Number 4, Gran Turismo. Even fully discounting the ongoing controversies surrounding Gran Turismo 7's botched launch, the statuesque racing simulator franchise has always been a touch divisive among general gamers. For petrolhead enthusiasts, Gran Turismo is an absolute dream, but to those more casual racing game fans lured in by the sleek graphics and AAA status, we're gonna say it, Gran Turismo is bloody boring. Years of playing the increasingly brilliant Forza Horizon games has admittedly spoiled a lot of people on what to expect from a modern racer, and even though the two series are very different, Forza makes Gran Turismo seem like a positive snoozer by comparison. Gran Turismo 7, for example, is a beautiful game that begs to be admired in a museum, but races against interminably predictable AI who stick to the racing line no matter what are positively joyless. To be fair, a lot of Gran Turismo fans will fully agree that the series is boring, but add that they take some sort of hypnotic pleasure in it, perhaps not unlike going fishing. And that's fine, but it's a continual disappointment that a franchise so invested in detail and presentation can't also make driving sexy cars thrilling and engaging. Number 3, Kingdom Hearts. The Kingdom Hearts franchise is really a 2-decade case study in the power of Disney branding, and how effectively it's papered over a series whose overarching story is a migraine-inducing mess. Fans of the series will politely call Kingdom Hearts' spaghettified narrative dreamlike, which is to say, it doesn't make a damn lick of sense. While Square Enix's Final Fantasy games flirt with incoherence at the best of times, Kingdom Hearts goes all in on a uniquely incomprehensible brand of non-logic, quite like gaming hasn't seen prior or since. It's probably a disservice to anime to call Kingdom Hearts the most anime-like of all major AAA video game franchises, because the storytelling and characterization are so convoluted and poorly told as to be actively genuinely boring. That a series centered around visiting Disney-themed worlds can't even cobble together a basically engaging story is, frankly, stupefying. It makes the fatal mistake of massively overcomplicating itself to the extent that only the most hardcore, over-invested fans can really make heads or tails of it. Without a flicker of emotional engagement beyond the dopamine hit that comes when the game tugs on the player's nostalgia receptors through all those Disney references, Kingdom Hearts is a soulless, empty vessel of a series. Oh god, please don't come for me. Number 2, Red Dead Redemption 2. Now is the part in the video where Jack has come for one of my favorite games of all time, but we must stay true to the article, so here we go. On reflection, Red Dead Redemption 2 is actually something of an unexpected analog to the Gran Turismo series. Undeniably beautiful and crafted with a frankly troubling obsessiveness, and yet in its bones, rather tedious to play. RDR2 is the zenith of Rockstar's commitment to realism, crafting an experience which requires the player to reenact their character's every calorific exertion in order to do anything at all. The game has a gorgeously crafted animation for even the most mundane activities imaginable, which, paired with intentionally unresponsive controls, makes basic movement an active irritation. Even opening a cabinet is an unexpected faff in a game where you're centrally preoccupied with riding a horse and shooting people dead. Speaking of which, the gunplay is also sloppy and unrefined, ensuring that the excitement expected from most any Rockstar game is weirdly lacking here. There's a reason why so many people have beaten the game once and never gone back to it. The thought of dealing with those wading through treacle controls for another 30 hours couldn't seem less appealing, no matter the clear craft that's gone into the overall experience. You flew too close to the sun on this one, Rockstar, and considering the brutal developer crunch required to make it happen, it's easy to dismiss the game both artistically and ethically. Ouch. Number 1, Horizon Zero Dawn. While Horizon Forbidden West is scoring understandably solid reviews for improving upon the original PS4 blockbuster, Horizon Zero Dawn is such an aggressive exercise in style over substance that it's impressive it did well enough to earn a sequel at all. There's absolutely no arguing with the fact that Zero Dawn is an aesthetically beautiful game, but one that never manages to match the heft of those visuals with a compelling story. Protagonist Aloy certainly has promise, but soon enough gets bogged down in a thunderously dull sci-fi world salad plot that mechanically works through its narrative by way of generic shot-reverse shot cutscenes and forcing the player to stand around and watch holographic exposition dumps. The combat is thrilling and kinetic, but backed by a poorly presented story that's more likely to leave players mentally checked out than deeply enthralled by what's going on. Forbidden West isn't perfect in this regard either, but certainly learned some lessons from the original, which suffocated its most impressive elements underneath reams of soporific gasbagging. And that's the end of our admittedly very divisive list. Do let me know down in that comment section if there is anything I just said that you agree with. If there's stuff that you don't agree with, I apologize. Let us know. We want to hear from you. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm at Jess McDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more gaming goodness. Thanks.